Hello everyone and welcome to Inside the Mind of Sport. In today's episode, we'll look at the impact on the rest of the team when a team is missing some key players because of COVID. Discuss what the psychological impact is of technological advances in different sports. And talk a little bit about concussions and why it is so hard for mental problems and mental health issues to be recognized as injuries. If you enjoy this podcast, please make sure to rate it on iTunes, leave a like, comment wherever you're listening. Now, let's dive inside the mind of sport. Now, I am not alone in this episode. I am joined by Laura Parrot, who is the owner of Wheelhouse MPC, Mental Performance Consulting, and a PhD student at the University of Ottawa looking at sport psychology and more specifically coaching. Laura, how are you doing?
I'm great, Yella. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. I think we're both very excited about the topics today. So we're going to dive straight into it. So the first story that I want to talk about today revolves around COVID. There's no denying it that it has an immense impact on the world of sport. And in the last few weeks, there have been several teams that have been playing without their key players, and in some cases, even without a designated specialist. For instance, the Denver Broncos played their last game without a real quarterback, and they ended up losing 31-3. In Formula One, the Mercedes Formula One team was missing 7-time world champions Lewis Hamilton, and they threw a race win away with some bad teamwork at a pit stop. And another story, I follow volleyball a lot. An Italian team, Trentino, have been missing both their setters, a vital role in volleyball, forcing a different player, Dutch outside hitter Namir Abdelaziz, to play in that position. Now, obviously, I think everyone can understand that there is a big impact of missing a key player, right? If it's your star player, if it's the best player in that sport, that's going to have a lot of impact. But in a lot of these cases, it also seems to have an impact on the functioning of parts of the team that doesn't really involve these players. So for instance, in the case of the Broncos, not having a quarterback can explain only scoring 3 points in offense, but it cannot completely explain conceding 31 points. And in Formula One, having a different driver in your car shouldn't really change anything about the pit stops. The driver doesn't really do anything in that moment during the race. So I guess, Laura, my first question a little bit is, what do we feel like is going on here? Why are these missing players having such an impact on seemingly unrelated parts of the team?
Well, it's a very interesting topic. I think it has a lot to do with leadership and what the team is used to. So I know from just personal experience in sport and watching sport and working with athletes and everything that you get used to a certain person being in charge and also a certain person getting the attention too. So you kind of if your team is pretty consistent with its leadership and how each of the players each of the athletes are treated, then everyone kind of gets used to that method, that way of running the team. So then when the star player is gone, it can be it depends. It could be that the other people come up and they shine, or it could be that they're so not used to it that they don't know what to do, and they're worried about not that they don't know what to do, but that they are, there's all of a sudden all this pressure on them to be the one that shines or to lead the team, and they're not used to that. And so I think that it also it says something to coaches in that, you have to make sure you're shaking things up sometimes. You have to make sure that you're not just focusing all of your attention on your star players or your star athletes, and also not relying on them so much to carry the team. and that you're giving the other players opportunities to exercise those leadership skills and to, even just being in a different position, like being the one that now starts first or something, like in the race or in the F1 race or whatever, or like, yeah, just they're just not used to it, and that can really shake things up. And also with COVID, there's so many other things that
Mm,
people are worried about,
for sure.
like their families and all that kind of thing. Like there could be any number of things going on in their personal lives, and also the personal lives of the pit crew and the coaches, and just everyone is all shaken up right now, and they have to manage that stress somehow, and maybe it's not
Yeah.
coming easily. Yeah.
Well, I think that's interesting that you bring in like the other things that are happening with COVID. Like, why is this such a problem with COVID? We have injuries in normal times as well, and the stress I think is a really a good point. Is I can believe, and we know this from like personal experience at work. Like everyone is kind of like on edge, right? Nobody is comfortable right now. Nothing
Mhm.
is normal, is easy. So then maybe like missing that one little part for everyone in the team, like everyone involved, is just the little bit that pushes them over the edge, that puts
Mhm.
them in like a mental state that stops them from performing at their best. So I think, that's something that when I read this, I was like, wow, it might just be that missing that key player is just too much for
Yeah,
everyone else with where they are right now. And
totally.
you mentioned the coaches. So you're a coach and you're missing your key player. Like, do you, how do you tell that your other people on the team are like over that edge? Like, how do you address that?
I think I think it comes down to how much you know your players in the first place. And this would be easier said in like a professional setting instead of like a youth sport where the coach normally coaches. Or actually, I'm not sure how this is for every sport, but I know the few sports. Anyway, there's a few sports I know of that the coaches just coach one level, like one age group. So each year
Mm,
they're getting a new batch of people who they have to know, right? They have to get to know these players so they don't, and they have, if their season is like 7 months or something, they have 7 months to get to know them, but it's not the same as if you've worked with the player for like 2 or 3 years, like you get to know them a bit better then. But so it certainly helps if you understand how your athletes individually process stress and process, um, especially the stress of the game day or the competition or even practice. And also, it's key to understand how each of the players relate to one another and socialize with each other and also rely on each other in the competition setting. So you can kind of see, yeah, I mean, how would a coach notice that a player is about to be over the edge? It can look different for different people, but I'd say like you can get a sense from chatting with the
mm,
player beforehand. Like it's hard to say. It some may be very quiet, when normally they're super loud or outgoing. Some might be nervously like doing things they wouldn't normally do, like packing and repacking their bag, or like double checking that they locked something, or I don't know, any type of preparation stuff that they're doing differently or excessively, could be a good sign of heightened anxiety. um, and just noticing, yeah, differences in movement. Even, are they walking with their head down when they're usually pretty sprightly? Are they, stuff like that, just
right.
because it's so unique to the athlete, and because humans are so complex and they're so different from each other, they could have different tells that
Right.
they're.
Yeah.
So really, the coaches have to make sure that at the beginning of the season they're one of their concerns is making sure they know the athletes individually.
Yeah, and I think it's cool that you mentioned kind of like the difference. I think sometimes we relate anxiety and stress with going from kind of like being happy and upbeat to being kind of down and slow and head is down, but that's not always the case. Like the reaction to anxiety for actually quite a lot of people is to kind of go to that happy, like, you know, pretending that nothing is wrong. So the difference is really important. If your player is normally a bit of a, you know, has a bit of introvert and doesn't say too much, and suddenly is like, you know, dancing to the song and singing really loudly, like that should also be a trigger of being like, wait, hold up, what's going on here?
Yeah, definitely. And definitely just even just checking in with them, you know, it doesn't mean if they're acting differently, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're anxious, but it definitely should be a sign to the coach to check in or to, you know, address it in some way, whether it's small or not. It could even not even involve talking to the athlete. It just depends on the situation. And I had something else that I was going to say, but I forgot.
Well, I'll add to that. You know, these are all very good points, and we talk about like what can the coaches do, but I also think it's unfair to say like, oh well, the coaches in, you know, for the Denver Broncos or the Mercedes Formula One team, they didn't, you know, the leaders there didn't do a good job, because those are also people that are right on the edge of like their tension right now, because they have to think about COVID and just the fact as a coach that you would plan for a game and then figure out that your most important player is like, well, you know, he can't play.
Yeah.
Like so I think across the board there's a lot to do. And the final thing I want to say about this before we move on to our next topic is, when I read this, there's something that I really enjoy talking about, which is preparing for success or preparing for mistakes, for things to go wrong, and the difference between the two. Where if you prepare for success, what ends up happening for a lot of people is that they try to control as many tiny little things as possible. Right? Like if I get all of these things right, I'll be great. Which is a great thing as long as you have the ability to do that and everything goes right. On the other hand, you have preparing for things to go wrong, where you actually say, well, I'm just going to make a list of possible things that can go wrong and figure out what I'm going to do if they happen. And a general thing, I think, for a lot of people is we can spend some more time preparing for things to go wrong. What are we going to do? And not only, you know, who am I going to put in that Formula One seat, or who is going to play quarterback, but also what am I going to do with the rest of the team, and does everyone have a plan for COVID? So I think it's an interesting thing, and I would love to be in those meetings for those teams to hear how they are, you know, what are they talking about, and what are they planning.
Yeah, like the COVID, this is unprecedented. Like there's no guidebook to this. It's a global pandemic that is influencing absolutely every sport team. Like there's hardly anything that has happened that does that. Like all over the world, every single sport team would be affected in some way, big or small. And I think that for the in terms of the preparing for things that could go wrong or things that could go right, I think that it's important to note in this podcast for listeners that the timing of when you're preparing for things that could go wrong is important, and how much time you allot to that, because essentially you want the players to go into the game or the competition ready to perform and confident in themselves and their own potential for performance, and also confidence in the other athletes that they're going to have to be working with to achieve their various goals throughout the game and the competition. So you want, in order to equip each athlete with that confidence, you do have to individually, as the athletes, you know, they have a lot of responsibility here too, and they have to be working with the coaches and thinking about what could go wrong, but not right before the performance, like not,
Hmm.
and making
Yeah.
sure that they're not like just focusing on what could go wrong. And so I guess I like to look at things in terms of like an overall basis of how you want things to happen, like to go into a game. Overall, you want people to be confident, calm, confident, and ready is what are the three things that I think of. And so that's the overall. And then there's the parts of that, one of which would be important, that each player is confident that if they encounter each of these challenges, that they're going to be able to tackle them appropriately and effectively during the game. But yeah, I just wanted to say, don't have that be your basis, I guess. Have your basis be something else, and have
Right.
that be a part. Yeah.
Yeah. So another story that really caught my attention lately, and I think is a really cool thing to discuss. It comes from the world of athletics, from long distance running, but I think it's a more broad discussion. So Kenyan runner Kibiwot Kandi broke the world record on the half marathon by running just over 21 kilometers in just 57 minutes and 32 seconds. And this happened only about a year after Eliud Kipchoge broke the magical 2-hour barrier for the marathon. Mm-hmm. And the similarity between these two records is quite large, because after both of them, a big part of the conversation was about the shoes they were wearing. So these shoes have a special foam and a carbon plate, and they are aimed to help the athlete maintain more speed and spend less energy when running. They are actually so efficient that they now have been banned from major international competitions. And what this leads to is that many people are saying that these records are being broken is just because of the shoe. And I feel like every time I hear that, there's something that isn't right to me, because it seems like there's just a full attribution that they said, like, oh, it's the shoe, like almost like anyone can do it kind of vibe. And I guess if we look at it from the athlete's perspective, you have just run, something that is a world record, something that nobody else has ever done before. And you come over the line, and then people start saying, well, it was just the shoes you were wearing. Or, in swimming a few years ago, about 12 years ago by now, we had the magic floating swimsuits that made everyone go ridiculously faster. What do you think goes on in the head of one of those athletes when kind of that phrase is said?
Well, I think it's so unfair and kind of heartbreaking to think of an athlete thinking about this, because there is so much pressure to get the best equipment, and to just when you're at that level, you want to perform the best that you can. And also you've got sponsors, and they want you to be, showing off their products, and they want you to be wearing the latest shoes and the latest whatevers that they've worked so hard on. And they do design them to improve performance. Of course, they want the athletes to wear them. And so there's all those other pressures on the athlete. And then to have that, to add on their own personal sacrifices that they've gone through, to get to the high level that they're at. It's not as if anyone can put on those shoes and run under 2 hours, right? So it's like they are the best of the best of the best, and their shoes are supporting them. But I mean, they're ultimately putting in the work. There are there's so many different parts of this topic that could be discussed in terms of privilege as well. So there's the whole, depending on how much the super great equipment costs, then some are more likely to be successful in the sport, I guess, if they're able to afford the better equipment, that if the better equipment makes a super big difference, so there's that to consider. And there's there's also the part that when you were talking, I was thinking of about how people um, they make excuses for some athletes and
Yeah.
then not others. Like they'll be like, "Oh, it's only the shoe," but then like an athlete that's like them or something, or is just generally liked by everybody, then they'll be like, "Oh yeah, but if they didn't have the shoe, then like they totally still win, even though they made a totally different
Yes.
argument against another person." So, and I think there's again a lot of you know there's in the sport world there's discrimination, sexism, like everywhere. So it's the same type of thing that you would see elsewhere in other social situations in the world. So it's annoying that happens, and that they'd be like, oh yeah, like yeah, this it was only he only won because of this shoe, like he's not that great. I like this other person, but like they weren't wearing the shoe,
Mm.
it just anyway, yeah.
I think it's a good point because the emphasis on the technology, whether it's a shoe, a swimsuit, or I think bobsledding has a very large technological impact. Where like if you spent the most amount of time on your sled, then you're the fastest,
Right.
or at least that's what people say.
Yeah.
But it just gives people a way out
Yeah.
of recognizing actual athletic
Yeah.
achievement. And like I think the most famous example is there's the videos of comparing Usain Bolt and Jesse Owens, and they're saying, well, if Jesse Owens ran with the modern shoes and whatever, then he would just be this much far behind Usain Bolt. So Usain Bolt is not that much better. But I think what we have to keep in mind is that it's not just like you can just implement technology to somebody and then
Yeah.
they are magically using the benefits. And I think
Mm-hmm.
a good example of this comes from the documentary about the first attempt of the sub 2 hour marathon. I think it's called Breaking Two.
Mm-hmm.
And there there's three runners. Eliud Kipchoge is one of them. But one of the other ones is Lalisa Desisa, and who's an absolutely amazing marathon runner. Has consistently ran, I think it's like 2:05 times. Is really good and does that all the
Mm-hmm.
time. And he just couldn't adapt to the higher pace.
Mm.
His technique and his body wasn't able to adapt to the technology.
Okay.
So even though theoretically he had the endurance, the lung capacity, and the muscle strength and everything to do it, theoretically, that's what they explained. He
Mm-hmm.
wasn't able to do it because just his technique and his just the overall package wasn't able to adapt enough. And
Mm-hmm.
when I see these things and people go, oh, it's just a shoe, it's just the swimsuit, it's just the sled, whatever, I'm like, but it's also about, do you have the ability to use it? Are you
Mm-hmm.
able to adjust mentally and physically to that challenge? I can
Mm-hmm.
imagine it's so hard if you're used to running a marathon at a certain pace to just go like 1% faster. Must feel
Ugh.
like you're, yeah, it must feel so different.
Yeah,
Things,
totally.
small changes at that level of athletic ability, tiny changes make such a big difference in how it feels,
Mm-hmm.
that your ability to change that and be able to convince yourself that you're going to be able to to sustain that 1% for 2 hours that's so tricky. And I would love for that to be almost in the conversation. It's not he ran the world record because of the shoes, but you
Yeah.
can say, like, I get it, the shoes make a difference, we're not denying that, but you can say he
Yeah.
ran the world record with the shoes.
Right.
It's the athlete with the technology that
Yes.
combined
Yeah.
make a world record happen. I don't know what your opinion is about that.
Totally. I love that comment because it's so much about how the story is shaped, and that really can be what that can have a huge impact on the athlete and how they're telling the story. Like they could even think ahead of time, like, okay, I want to wear these shoes, but if I wear these shoes, then people will say only one because of the shoes. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like, it's too bad that that has to be a worry, that like, how are people going to view me if I wear these shoes, if I don't wear the shoes? I mean, and I like the way you phrased it in that this athlete won with the shoes, not because of the shoes, because that's, for lack of a better word, it's bonkers to say that the shoes, I mean, the shoes didn't win the race, the person won the race. And anyway, and it's just so rude to the athlete as well, because I mean, day in, day out, they're putting in time and effort and money and sacrifice, and to chalk it all up to the shoes is just disrespectful. And I understand the advantages versus disadvantages argument, but in terms of the athlete themselves, going through that experience of competing and testing out different equipment, it's just like, come on, everyone, like, let's give this athlete. But even as I'm saying that, I'm thinking like, but then some athletes have this huge team behind them that's giving them all this great equipment, and then other people don't. But I guess it's just part of the game. Like, if you're an amateur athlete and you become great, then people start giving you equipment and stuff. So I guess it doesn't. Yeah. I mean, no, there's going to be no clear, smooth situation for it. But there's lots of different aspects there to think about.
And I think, we're obviously there is some unfairness in that kind of thing, often based on money and resources. Mm-hmm. But I think it's fair to say that if we just change the word because to with, we would feel like it's a lot more fair to the athlete who is still putting in the effort, even though they might be getting ahead a little bit on technology because of what they have.
Totally. And one more thing, when you were saying about the athlete who can't adjust to the shoes, technology is changing so much over time that shoe scientists might come up with a shoe that goes well with this athlete who can't adjust to this shoe. So it's because technology is ever changing. It's hard to say what the limits are, and I think, as we were discussing earlier, the limits for technology are often decided because of social reasons, not because of ethical or moral reasons. Mm-hmm. People are wanting to keep certain groups down, so they'll be like, okay, this is the limit, so that, I'm not sure that, because people weren't privy to our conversation earlier, so I'm not sure that maybe
that's okay. I think we can keep that conversation for a different podcast.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our final story for today, because I think we'll have quite a bit to say about that both as well. So the week was, again, as it has been in multiple times throughout the last few years, filled with concussion news. From former rugby union players coming out saying they were suffering from dementia and personality changes after their career, and questions being raised about the overall safety of rugby union as a sport, to soccer players in the Premier League openly discussing the idea of a concussion substitute, where somebody who is suspected to have a concussion can be substituted almost for free outside of the limit of 3 or nowadays 5 substitutions in the game. And this all comes, of course, after a few years ago when the NFL was talking about concussions a lot, and even had a big settlement case about with former players about the impacts of playing NFL football. Mm-hmm. And to me, every time one of these stories breaks, it talks about the long-term mental effects of concussions and playing sports that have a lot of concussions. But when we talk about concussions themselves, we always seem to focus on the physical symptoms. So the stories when athletes are retired are, I suffer personality changes, dementia, all these kinds of mental health issues. But when athletes are still playing, when their careers are still alive, for a better word. It's about, do you still have symptoms? What is going on? And if you look at the famous return to play protocols, the concussion protocols that guide when players are allowed to play again, they mostly talk about physical attributes again, right? Do you have a headache? Are you sensitive to light? All these kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And what astonishes me is that it seems that the world of sport still is so reluctant to accept mental symptoms and mental health issues as, like, just as physical symptoms, and be able to see, feeling down or having emotional problems as an injury, just like a rolled ankle is. And I guess the question to start off with is, why do we feel like it's so difficult for sports to accept mental health symptoms as injuries?
Unfortunately, I think a lot of it has to do with the mentality that has been generated decades ago, about like the suck it up, be a man, don't, play through, or not, don't play through the pain or whatever. And it's like physical pain and mental health symptoms. It's like they've put it on two totally different levels, and even maybe not even in the same field of or whatever. And it's too bad. And I think back to the Concussion movie. Did you see Concussion?
Yes.
Yeah. And the whole the NFL, like, covering stuff up and being so reluctant to even consider that there could be like a major mental and physical result of multiple concussions that are affecting these players, and in many cases have led to death. And it's such a social it's such a social thing that has such a huge influence, which is so unfortunate. Like, it's like they're refusing to see clear evidence of a major issue. And I think it all comes back to, real men don't talk about it, and that even, like, trickles down to women as well. Like, even though it's like real men don't talk about it, it's like athletes are tough, like athletes don't have mental health issues. They're athletes. They've got their life together because they're fit and they do their, all this stuff. And I think it's such a social issue, and the reluctance is incredible. The reluctance to accept that mental health is a consequence of, or mental health issues are a consequence of concussions. And it makes people uneasy, I think, to talk about on a personal level. So because the culture is that way, in a culture of reluctance to accept that mental health is a result of concussions, on a personal level, if an athlete experiences the concussion, then it's not like they have a blanket of support that they know that they'll receive. They're probably going to be met with this message that you shouldn't be having mental health issues, but then again, you will, because you likely will if you get a lot of concussions. Like, it's just backwards.
I think that's a really interesting point, because I do agree with you that there's a large cultural part to this where, athletes are tough and fit and perfect, and, they're the best kind of people we have. But to me, what I've been noticing, talking to a lot of former professional athletes and seeing kind of news, is that I think there's a change with athletes themselves who are suffering mental health issues becoming more and more open about it. Nowadays, more like after their careers, they'll talk about, I had this while I was playing. And I think there's a change there where the athletes that are actually suffering from those issues do at some point tend to speak out of it. speak out
Yes.
about it. But they then also say, but there was no place I could go. There was no one to talk. There was nothing in place to help me in those moments, and that's why I kept it to myself. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a really interesting point there where it almost sometimes seems like the people that are in have leadership, right? That are have power, have control, are the ones that are uncomfortable talking about it, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
don't ask,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that it's when somebody says, "Oh, I'm not feeling great today," and I go, "Well, what's going on?" And it's just I feel very down, and they're like, "Well, it takes, I guess, a next level of understanding to then address that and say, okay, well, I know that could be a symptom
Mm-hmm.
of something more than just, everyone has a bad day, but if you have, 60, 80, 90, 300 bad days in a row, then there's something else going on."
Mm-hmm.
And when I hear these stories again, like the ones about rugby union players, it's they knew that things weren't right, that they
Mm-hmm.
weren't supposed to feel this way, but there was no support system. So it almost seems like we've progressed to a point where we understand on an individual basis that mental health is important, but we're not
Mm-hmm.
able to deal with other people's mental health issues yet. I don't know
Good
if you
point.
if you share that, but that's what I sometimes feel when I read a lot about this.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think that it is a slow change. And I do agree that on a personal level, I think people are becoming more aware of their own mental health, and what it looks like to them to feel okay versus not okay, like within themselves. And I think you're totally right in that it the people in the management positions, the major leadership positions within the sport team and within the sport organization, when they model vulnerability, that makes a huge difference for the players and a cultural shift within the team and the organization. So if if they have, let's say, an expert come into their team and their organization and do a presentation or even work with them for like 3 weeks or something on mental health and recognizing it and dealing with it and supporting each other, I it doesn't always end in change, and it often ends in going right back to how it was before, because
Mm,
that's what people are comfortable with. That's where they know what to expect. So if they were to change, and move into this more holistic focus on a person's overall health, and it would include mental health, then they don't know what to expect in their interactions with other people. They don't know what to expect when they personally experience something. If they go to their coach and say, I'm having a mental health issue today, um, and whatever, and then they don't know if the coach will actually accept it. So often they will
mm,
just go right back to how it was in the don't talk about it, don't express what's happening, and keep it taboo. So it really is up to the coaches to establish this culture within the team. And then they can also rely on key players in the team to, like the captains and assistant captains, to assist in this cultural shift. And they need to put concrete methods in place to like to make sure that they're held accountable to this cultural shift that they want to make, in terms of mental health. So talking to each other about, okay, what are our personal fears about this? Let's just get that all out as a
mm-hmm,
small group of the leadership team talking about this. Okay, how are we going to um, make this cultural shift within our team so that the players know it's okay to come and talk to us? And then what are we going to give back to them when they come and talk to us? How are we going to feel? Will I feel uncomfortable? I think so. Okay, so let's talk about that. Why do I feel uncomfortable about it? And then work through all of that discomfort and continuously, really, like everyone should be reflecting all the time about, okay, why would this conversation make me uncomfortable? What in my past, what is it about me that I would be uncomfortable with this? Just so that you can make sure that you're maintaining that shift so that it is sustainable, because that's what you need is sustainability in this case. And then eventually the athletes will trust that they can approach the coaches and they will get help and support when this happens, because essentially it comes down to trust, and trust comes down to consistency. So those are two key things and factors here.
Let's wrap this story up with actually a positive. I wanted to have a positive story. It comes from Italian volleyball, where due to COVID and some personal issues, there was a player. There's no need to specify who it is, who was suffering from some depression, being locked up and whatever. And his team gave him as much time as he needed off, whilst I'm pretty sure still being paid for everything. He was able to recover, to work on that and be in a better place and return to the team, and is now playing very well. So there are examples of really respecting these things as honest injuries and figuring out how you can get back from it in a sustainable way, rather than having people self-destruct. With that said, Laura, thank you very much for being on this episode. If you were listening and you do enjoy it, please make sure to rate on iTunes, leave comments, likes, and if you have any questions or things that you would like me, Laura, or any other people that would be on the podcast to discuss, you can always find me on Instagram. Look for JWK Mental Performance Training. That's on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, wherever you want to find me. I will link all the stuff where you can find Laura as well in the show notes, and I hope to see everyone again in the next episode.
Thanks. Bye.